Hello.
Hey, Angie.
Hi, Lori. How are you? All right, I'm going to continue to let people in. Hi, everybody. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Gotta disable this waiting room. I never understand the waiting room. Lori, are you back at home now?
Yep. Sadly.
Our vacation is coming up pretty soon.
Where are you guys going?
Just up to Cambria, which is where we got married.
Oh, nice.
Mhm.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, we had the best wedding weekend, and oh, here comes some other folks.
Where'd you stay? We're going up there in a couple months.
You going up to Cambria too? Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, I know. What we got married at Cambria Pines Lodge, but we are not staying there this time. We are staying in an Airbnb, but we're super excited. All right, we got some more folks rolling in. I think Shasta, you're on now too, right?
Nope.
Did you say no?
Yes. It's
Love
all
your
an
neighbor.
illusion.
Not really here.
Yeah, I feel like this, I got a couple of messages back that people are potentially vacationing even today. So it's just what happens with summer meetings.
Yep.
All right, I'm just continuing to admit people, but just welcoming you all as you come. Thanks for being here. Sorry you're not on vacation at the moment.
Hi, Angie and Shasta. For some reason, my camera doesn't want to work today, but I'm here. This is
Oh, okay.
Dorette.
Hi, Dorette.
Hello.
It's good to hear your voice at least.
Yeah. I'm going to see if I can get it to work a different way.
So California folks, we probably want to talk to you at some point about something we're calling what are we calling it, Shasta? Have you seen it? The California Tribal Energy and Climate Exchange.
Oh, yeah.
Radio conversations through the tribal gaps analysis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Trying to keep track.
Yes.
And I think our kickoff for that is Monday.
I think so. All right, more folks are joining us. I'm kind of keeping an eye on the waiting room, but why don't we go ahead and get ourselves started here. And Shasta, do you want to make any welcoming remarks to folks? We're just going to probably dive right into our agenda.
Yeah, not much other than thank you for being here. And just as a refresher, if we could put into the chat just a hello and who you are and who you represent, that would be great.
Right. Yeah, well, hi again, folks. Last time, if you were with us, we had such a good first meeting a month ago, and we were able to do longer introductions, and that was the majority of the time we spent together. So we're not going to do that again, but I was really happy to do that and to hear about all of the various experts and solutions that are out there that we have brought in to this work group, and I'm so pleased to see so many of you returning. If there are folks on the line that weren't here last time, I want to give you an opportunity. We don't want to spend too much time here because we've got some stuff to do, but if you weren't here last time, if you would just kind of briefly just say your name, organization, and location. If you are comfortable saying that out loud, we would welcome you to do that. Anybody who's comfortable also sharing their webcams, it just makes it a little bit more personable, but not required. Does anybody want to volunteer, or I can try to pick out some folks that I think weren't here last time? I might not get it all right.
Chaz, were you here? Chaz put something in the chat, but I don't remember you being here last time, Chaz.
Chaz is not shy about calling you out.
No, well, you know, I know him from other work groups. He's also the mayor, right? Aren't you the mayor of Philomath?
I am the mayor of Philomath.
Philomath, thank you.
Yes, yes, which means love of learning in Latin. So yeah, I am the Affiliated Tribes of Northwest Indians Tribal Liaison in their climate change program. I'm based out of Philomath, Oregon, happen to be the mayor. I'm happy to be here and to be working and talking with all of you. Thank you.
Yes.
Thanks, Chaz. And you can feel free to call me out on a future meeting, just like I called you out. So turnabout is fair play.
And Amber, we had somebody else from the Climate Science Alliance here last time, but do you want to say hello?
I'm just really excited to be on the call with the mayor. With Chaz. No, it's nice to see you guys. I just ran in from another meeting, an in-person meeting, which has been a really long time since I had one of those, but it's nice to see you all. I lead the Climate Science Alliance and also affiliated with the Southwest Climate Adaptation Science Center and the Desert Research Institute. And we do a lot of wonderful work together through the tribal work group with Shasta. And just a lot of good work happening down here in Southern California. I'm excited for you guys' project, and thanks for letting me say hello.
Thanks, Amber. And Beth, I wonder if you have the opportunity to say a quick hello.
I'm Beth Gibbons. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the executive director at the American Society of Adaptation Professionals. I'm based in Ypsilanti, Michigan. And ASAP connects and supports people working on climate adaptation and resilience across North America, and happy to be here and being connected in the project.
Yeah, Beth has a lot of extensive networks in this area, particularly in the Great Lakes region, and experience working with climate data, even at her previous role at NOAA, right?
Yeah, I was previously the manager for the Great Lakes Integrated Science and Assessment Program, or the RISA program for the Great Lakes, and the director for University of Michigan's Climate Center, and have worked with a number of tribes throughout the Great Lakes region in the Northeast, and yeah, continue to do that in different capacities through ASAP now.
Well, thank you. Is there anybody else I missed that wasn't here last time that wants to say a quick hello?
Hey, Angie, I'll just say a quick hello. It's Marcus Griswold. I from Calm Waters Group. I do community planning and work with tribes as well, mostly on the West Coast, but also some work in Chesapeake Bay. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. And Marcus does some work with the Tribal Climate Health Project as well. Okay, well, thanks again, everybody, for joining us. Just to remember what our purpose is of getting together, it's to connect national health and climate data experts and invite you to exchange knowledge on priority tribal adaptation and resilience data needs, to share tools, practices, ideas, and lessons learned from the field, and to explore opportunities to develop and scale up solutions to address tribal resilience data needs. So Shasta and I, in our various work, including the Tribal Climate Health Project, have felt this has been a big area of focus for us to try to build more accessibility for tribes that are trying to undergo their vulnerability and adaptation planning processes, particularly those that may want to do a better job incorporating health. So we wanted to establish this group because we know that the expertise is out there, and we wanted to bring folks together, assuming that we could actually potentially share knowledge in a way that is useful, and we may come up with something together. And so I have a little agenda here. I want to give a brief moment for any member announcements. So if folks on the line are have something in their own work that's interesting, they want to share it, update something that others can benefit from knowing about, I just want to give a little room here at the beginning of these meetings for that. And I have one little update from a member that I'm going to share. I'll open it up to the floor first if anybody has anything. Okay.
And I have all sorts of stuff. I'm just waiting for other people to say something first. But I will mention a couple things real briefly. It's not out yet, but the Status of Tribes and Climate Change report should be out pretty soon. And I think several of us on the call have either worked on that or have had some hand in that document. And that's it's ITEP that has shepherded that whole process with the Tribal Resilience grant money from the BIA. And of course, there's always a lot of different conferences and forums and summits and things coming up. So this is a good opportunity also to let us know about those, and then we can help you to push those out to the audiences that you're trying to reach. So, on my behalf, Paula is hosting the Region 9 Tribal EPA annual conference this year. It's going to be in October, and Region 9 is California, Nevada, and Arizona. And it's going to be, even though we're hosting it, it's being held in South Lake Tahoe in Washoe tribal lands. So if you have any interest in that, you can please just shoot me an email. I will also put the conference website in the chat. And that's open to anyone to attend or to put out a proposal if you want to participate. The only requirement is that if you do not work for a tribe or for the EPA, the US EPA, then you need to have somebody from either a tribe or EPA as a co-presenter. There's other stuff coming up, but I don't want to take up all our time. Just let people know. Let us know if you have stuff you want us to publicize, and we're happy to do that.
I want to just let folks know too that Nikki Cooley from ITEP let us know that she is going to be testifying at a Senate committee hearing tomorrow for the hearing on climate crisis. So that's tomorrow, and in the chat I provided the link to that if you want to be watching. So that's awesome that a member of our group is getting to have such an influential moment with Congress. Okay, anybody else? All right, well, just know that that's something I'd like to do. So this is a place to share information if you would like to come next time. Okay, so the rest of the agenda, I want to go over the directory a little bit, just check in on that and how folks are doing with it, what the point of it is. I want to talk about our proposed goals. That should be a discussion that takes us a little time because I want us to be thoughtful about it. And then we didn't get a chance for me to get through the Tribal Climate Health Project's EISI tool. I wanted to kind of demo that a little bit more. And that's because I want to use these meetings to showcase solutions that are out there. So ours is just one, and this is just sort of warming us up so that others can feel comfortable also sharing their solutions. And it isn't just a, hey, look what I did. It's a, hey, what other ideas do you have? Are you are you aware of something that's like this? Are you aware of something that could build upon this, make it better, or that kind of a discussion, which I'd like to have afterward, or what lessons have been learned from this that others can benefit from. And then we'll just talk through what a standing meeting agenda might look like. So any comments on the agenda of the day? If anybody has any other ideas that they want to present? Shasta, are you good?
I'm good.
Great. Okay, so folks should have the link to the National Tribal Resilience Data Workgroup Directory. Probably one order of business could be to figure out how to quickly say that acronym in a way that doesn't sound weird. Nurturer, I don't know. But let me, Shasta, do you have the ability to share the link to that?
I can, but now I'm stuck on different and probably inappropriate ways to say that. Now I'm thinking like neuter DAO, and I don't know if we want to call it neuter. Probably not. Nature dwa. I will put the link in the chat.
Oh, here we go. Actually, I just got it down, so we should be good. And I don't expect you to be able to see this on my screen, so I'm going to take the actual screen over. But I want you to take a peek at this if you haven't already. And the idea for this came up during our last conversation since we all introduced ourselves, and there's such a good group, and I was able to take some notes on who everybody was, what your affiliations are, and if you have some solutions that you're already working on. I'm trying to kind of note them here, but I could use your help. So where you see yourself, I'd like you to make sure that it's accurate. So, and if there are blanks, just please fill them in. It was just me sort of trying my best to get this done quickly, but I think you can help me with it. E and F, rows, columns E and F are optional, but if you do want to share your email and phone with this group, please do, because part of what we'd like to do here is not just talk about solutions esoterically, but also get to know each other and potentially find, reasons to work together a little bit more. I added this column for role, and that was just me sort of coming up with ways to classify people. But if that's not ringing true to you, you can just describe your role somehow differently. So it was really, is your role more about tribal support? Is it tool development? Is it research or data science? And so those were some of the main categories. Policy is another category. So I may have gotten some of these wrong for you, and please just correct it. And then some notes. So what are you working on that's relevant to addressing tribal resilience data needs? And then a couple columns here on the right. Two questions I have for you. Are you at a future meeting willing to present on one of your own solutions? Or if it's not maybe you've done research, you don't have like a tool to offer, or you've worked closely with tribes and you want to share some knowledge, some lessons learned. Would you be willing to do that with us for the benefit of everybody else who's out here trying to solve this issue of data accessibility for tribes? And then the last little question here is, are you willing to be contacted by tribes looking for support? And so this is because Shasta and I are doing so many trainings through the Tribal Climate Health Project, and one of the things we said we were wanting to do was to develop also kind of a directory where we can help tribes better contact people that are available to provide support, technical assistance in this area, so for data. So if that's something that you do and you would be willing to let us share this more publicly, share your information more publicly with tribes, just click, you can just put yes or an X right there.
I want to say it's fun to watch people jumping on and editing this in real time, and feeling like we're living in a Star Trek world where we can all just do this remotely. And I'm just waiting for somebody to invent the little handhold thing that the medical officers have, where they like wave it over your body and you're cured. We need something like that for the climate. You just wave it over the earth and it's cured. But I don't think we're there yet. But anyway, this is good. Thank you everybody for updating your information.
Yeah, it's nice for me to look at. I mean, this is you can see a broad distribution. We do a pretty good job of covering the United States between all of us. Of course, there's a pretty high level of participation from the West Coast, and that's just because it's where Shasta and I happen to be. But speaking of that, if there are other folks that work in this space, tribal resilience data, you can recommend them down below. And so I'd welcome you to add individuals to that, or if you're not comfortable putting them on this, you could just send me their name and contact information, or do an introductory email. And so that's that page. And I wanted to also share with you this second tab. And this is just where I think we can start storing solutions. So for folks that are here, if you are offering a solution, let's take inventory of what's out there. So I dropped in ours as a sample, not that it's number one, not that it's the end all be all, but please add yours to it, because this helps us take an inventory, kind of scan the landscape of what's out there for tribes. So thank you, Jessica. I see you adding template there. And then here on this piece right here, this limitations. This is sort of a little self-assessment of, to what extent is it solving the problem for you? What's next for you? In which, what else could be done to better serve tribes in this way? All right, thank you for adding that, you guys. Wow, this is so efficient. So I really would love it if folks would be willing to present. Okay, so I see some folks saying yes, sure. Okay, perfect. So that's going to inform some of our future agendas. It's going to make it a lot easier for us to keep having these meetings. All right, are there any questions on the directory or comments or anything else as a member of this group that you would want, other information that you would want from your fellow members? Okay. You guys are all very agreeable today. All right, well, let me get rid of this for now then.
I shouldn't guffaw like that. You know, I just, yeah, I'm loving this as a cultural anthropologist. I am just fascinated by the culture of meeting via Zoom and, you know, just wondering what's going on behind the black screens.
All right. Okay, so this is a good part of the meat of the conversation today. I really do hope for some thoughtful engagement. I'm sorry to make you think hard on a, what is it, Wednesday morning, or maybe it's an afternoon for you. But these are some thoughts for what our goals could be as a group. So thinking about, we talked about our purpose up front. There's a purpose to us getting together, but this is more about what do we want to do together? What will we achieve together? What's, you know, if we are successful, how do things change? And so these were some initial thoughts. They may not be worded right. They may not be complete. It may be different than why you've come to participate. And so I wanted to have kind of an open conversation. It doesn't have to be, you can wordsmith this if you'd like. You can even do that over chat if that's easier for you to just kind of like suggest different words. But I do want to hear from folks, not even being tainted by what's on the screen, about what you think our goals could be as a group together, knowing that we have a US focus and we have all the experts. We have a lot of really good experts. We could even have additional experts in the room to try to tackle this issue on tribal resilience data accessibility. So I'm wondering if folks can kind of share some thoughts.
And feel free just to unmute yourself or put it in the chat. And you know, it says proposed goals, but I think here this is an opportunity just for brainstorming. And what would you like to see as far as what we can do?
I have an idea. I don't know if it's a good idea, but I have an idea. I mean, I'd like to be able to leverage this group to put pressure on people that develop tools that exclude tribes or tribal needs, to somehow kind of like pressure them to collaborate with tribes or to do something so that the data is easier to retrieve. Yes,
so pressure. I have a whole section for pressure, but no, I like that. So yeah, and that could even fit kind of closely within some of these.
Yeah, I think that partly falls under the idea of collaborative solutions, but I think partly, Lori, what you're getting at is that at this point, it's not a collaboration.
Collaborative pressure.
Yes, we can all collaborate in putting pressure on.
Well, I think that looks like maybe identifying those that aren't doing that first, right?
Yeah, and I mean, I know that including us, there's reasons that they're not doing it, but I think sometimes the reason is, oh, we didn't know that that was a thing.
Yeah, or they might have tried and thought about it, but
gave up after one try.
Well, yeah, maybe they weren't sure how to engage with tribes, or they weren't even sure how to map them. I've come across that, right? Like the mapping gets really tricky.
Yeah, so I think the pressure kind of, it falls under both collaborative and better data access and, I mean, and ready for action. I think it kind of falls in all of those areas.
I'm
maybe
curious.
Beyond, oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Well, I guess I was curious about, you know, do you feel like there's not a framework out there that people could follow, or do you feel like there just needs to be more cultural shift of, you know, people working on this?
Marcus, do you mean like a framework that agencies should be using to engage tribes?
Yeah, right. Because I mean, I think the point of this is like all of this happens at like one at a time right now, right? So how can this group improve efficiency? And if you put out a set of principles or like a step-by-step approach, would that be helpful? I understand kind of the encouragement and the pushing part of it. how do you kind of do that in a positive way?
I did mention that Strategic Growth Council did come out with a set of principles like that, or a set of recommendations. And I think Leah's on the call here. I don't know if you want to speak to that, but trying to help other state agencies learn how to engage with tribes. This is kind of sort of a guidance. So yeah, some of these might be turning into sort of objectives, meaning like, okay, if these are our goals, how do we get there? And so things that we can do together, and then managing that, the things that we do being things that we have capacity to do. And so melding minds around identifying tools that don't serve tribes well. That one seems very clear cut to me and right in our lane. And then trying to identify opportunities that, like, some of these may be turning into programs or projects that would need us to go out and find funding sources for that, and maybe collaborate amongst partners within this group to do it, right? If it's going to be a larger lift. But we can come up with those ideas and see who wants to partner on some solutions there.
One more question. I'm curious, and maybe I missed the first meeting, but who would be the key partners? I mean, I know there are a lot of agencies here, more state, federal. Like, who are we trying to bring together? You know, there's funders as well, philanthropic funders and tribes. So I'm curious, like, if we wanted to put like a finer point on that, or just leave it kind of broader for now.
Yeah, we could make that a little bit more specific, just based on, we were very intentional about who we invited to this group, where we wanted to have a spread amongst state, federal agencies, university folks or academic folks, you know, folks that are more targeting on like raw data collection or research, folks that are working directly with tribes that understand the needs on the ground, that might be more CBOs, tribes themselves, or tribal serving organizations and nonprofits. So we have, that's kind of the realm of folks that are at least here. So tribal serving organizations that have some ability to address this for tribes.
This is Chaz. One thing I was thinking is that it would be nice to host some sort of a in-person or virtual meeting, some sort of a meeting where folks like ourselves, but also where we invite the tribes to come and participate and to help us flesh out what goals and questions they have or needs that they would have that might help us. Well, one, it would help us build a larger network, but it would also help to justify any potential projects that we might solicit funding for. We can invite funding agencies to that as well, so that they can participate in the conversation with the tribes and see how those questions or ideas are shaped.
Yeah, so to organize some sort of a advisory group made up of people that represent tribes that could speak to this issue. Yeah, I don't know if you all are experiencing the same thing. It's maybe because I'm looking for it, but there are so many requests for input right now, like overwhelming. It would be somebody's full-time job just to respond to them all. And every agency is so inward looking when they're asking it. They're just, it's these one-offs like, hey, focus all your attention on me for a second, where I feel like there's some efficiencies that could be gained by having a place to come, or these agencies could come regularly to a group that's committed to doing that. And then how do you get them committed to doing that, and what kind of support do you provide for those folks that are doing that work? But I like that. I like that. So adding it to the list.
Angie, this is Tom Gates. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I was kind of going off of what Marcus and Chaz are saying. I'm wondering also, in the key partners words here, if we have a way to know what other coalitions are out there doing the same thing. So we're sort of focused on individuals that represent, whether it's a tribe or agency or program. How many more groups like this are out there? And how do we network across those? there might be, and it starts to become more of a hierarchical thing. But, you know, what if there's 20 groups like this across the country doing the same thing or something that intersects? And how do you get all of those groups together in some sort of national coalition? Like, I'm thinking like land trust. You know, there's 10,000 land trusts, but they're all sort of organized under the National Land Trust organization. I forget the name of it, but something like that might be something to think about.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm back.
Sorry, Shasta, did you get cut off for a second?
Well, so this is a great story, so just hold on. Briefly, I kicked something under the table and unplugged myself, which is great, but confusing. And so I had to go hunting around in the nest of cords behind my computer to try to figure out what I kicked. And then I finally found it. And then when the computer came back on, it was like, oh, it's time to install updates. And so it installed updates for like 5 minutes. And so, so I don't know what I missed, but I'm sure whatever it was genius.
We talked about having actual tribal representatives in some sort of advisory capacity available to provide input to the agencies that need it. And then Tom just mentioned that it would be good to take inventory of other coalitions that are out there that are maybe trying to do the same thing. So that's actually a good conversation if folks are aware of coalitions that are trying to do this. So this is a collection of people out there trying to solve the problem. So in some way, either serving the tribes, making the data, making the tool, doing the research, providing the policy or funding for these types of data-based, data efforts. But I'm not aware of anybody else doing that specific thing. The bringing us all together.
Tom, did you have something in mind?
Well, I got to, this isn't the first time this has been thought about. There's got to be a whole bunch of these across the country. We just, and so if okay, let's say we put a whole bunch of time into creating a database of all of the awesome climate change and health climate change documents. What if we then turn around after we spend a year doing that and we find, oh, well, these guys right next door that we never knew existed, they just did the same thing. And oh, look, there's a 75 overlap between the documents they collected and the documents, so it's sort of like we were talking about individuals and how to network with other individuals in a tribal advisory. And I'm thinking there's got to be a broader hierarchy. I'm thinking of my good friend over in Arizona, Stefan Summer. And I know, he's at Northern Arizona, University of Northern Arizona, but I know he's doing some group like this, and I've been invited and I haven't really paid attention. But there's got to be lots of groups like this. And maybe there's a way to network with those groups. Let's say you do an annual conference and you bring all of those groups together in one big annual thing. You might get some synergy in a different way than just going at the individual. Just a thought.
Well, I think that's really important, Tom, and I see that people are putting things into the chat as well. And thank you, Carletta, for those really important groups, the Rising Voices, and I've been to their summit, and of course the work that ITEP does, all the work at the University of Oregon. And we're trying to create a specific focus on health needs and health data issues for tribes with this group, but you're right that there is a lot of overlap, and I think we can discuss that even now, because I think all of us probably are aware of and or participating in multiple different climate focused groups, and I know that sometimes I feel like my own efforts are being duplicated by a lack of collaboration between those various groups. Now, hopefully this is a safe space to say this, but those of you who know me know I really don't give a shit if it's safe or not. I'll just say what I feel like saying. But there's also, I think, some sense of competition between some people, where it's not just that we're already doing this work, let's work together. It's we're already doing this work, stay in your lane kind of approach. And I see nods So I know that we've all experienced that to some degree, and I don't want that. I'm a collaborator. I'm never about trying to tell somebody that we can do the job better than they can. I would rather see what we can do together. So I think that's something that's worth us talking about, is whether we are doing something that is filling a need that isn't already being filled. And I think Angie and I, in our own discussions and our own experience, thought that this specific work on the data, access to the data, is not a need that we see being filled. But if there are other people who are doing similar things, then I want to know about it.
Yeah, maybe the way. Sorry, go ahead.
Isabel, was that you?
Yeah, that was me. I'm sorry, there was a helicopter flying over. Well, there were 3 earlier, so I figured, oh no, oh, there they are. Yeah, is anyone from the tribal epicenters in the list? Because I just added Venecia. But if you're talking about health, they're a good source of expertise.
Yeah, I think she is on the list, isn't she, Angie?
Yes, we do have members. There's transition happening there, but yes, and they are one of our main partners actually with the Tribal Climate Health Project.
Okay. When I was looking and I couldn't tell whether I just missed it, but I put in her name anyway.
Yes, thank you. Yes, and so, if you are aware, and this is part of the goal here, it's like because we're offering these trainings through the Tribal Climate Health Project, and we're trying to offer these capacity building things, and so are so many of you. Well, maybe we can help each other learn what is out there. And I don't know a better way to do that other than the research I've already done and the vast hours spent swirling around trying to find the best things. But asking you all what you know, bringing that to the table and sharing that with each other, we think can have a lot of value. But thank you. And thank you for continuing to offer these suggestions in the chat. And so I'm thinking of those in a couple of ways. It's like, yes, let's check those out. Let's look to them for potential solutions, or whether or not they are already meeting this need, or that they might be potential new members that we want to bring in for the conversation.
Another thing I think is worth, go ahead, Tom.
Angie, one last thought on that, and then I'll let it go, is maybe some of these places that people are putting into the chat, maybe a simple Google search, and let's say we came up with 5 other groups that had an intersection, how broadly or narrowly we define that intersection. Like traditional ecological knowledge would have a lot to say about climate and health. But if, let's say we came up with 5 groups that we identified, maybe one future thing to do would be to have a meeting like this where we gave 15 minutes to each group that was willing to participate and just explored it. What are you doing? Where are you at? What sector do you serve? What region? And maybe it builds from there to explore that. Would be just to think of it as a future meeting.
Exactly we're on the same page, Tom. That's what the standing agenda will look like, where we're going to be inviting everybody to share what they're doing so that we can all learn what's out there and what lessons they're learning. Yeah, thank you. And Carletta, I think were not able to join for our first meeting, and you're offering so many suggestions here. And I actually just wondered if you wanted to say a quick hello and introduce yourself, and if you wanted to provide any more context around the links that you're sharing.
Hi, everyone. My name is Carletta Chief. I'm Dene, and I'm also an associate professor and extension specialist in environmental science at the University of Arizona. And my background is hydrology and water resources. So I work with tribes on the water challenges that they face. And when I started towards the end of my postdoc at Desert Research Institute back in 2009 timeframe was when I started working on climate change and tribes. And I was participated in the Southwest assessment, doing surveys with the Pyramid Lake Paiute tribe on climate change perceptions and observations, and also with the tribes in Nevada. I continue to work with them, and I'm part of Native Waters on Arid Lands, which is about climate adaptation. I'm also the program director for the Native Nations Climate Adaptation Program. And I've written some papers on climate change impacts on water resources of tribal nations and indigenous knowledge. A lot of that stemming from being part of Rising Voices around that same time frame. And then collaborating with Kathy Lynn over University of Oregon, where she had a student write a huge report on climate literature with tribes. My climate program has kind of dwindled down in the last 3 years to just working with the Pyramid Lake Paiute tribe on traditional knowledge and climate adaptations. So that's a little bit about myself, and I'm happy to be part of this group. Thanks for inviting me. I was part of a really huge group for the health impacts of climate change, that big report, and we were only able to write like maybe 1 page or something on health impacts. So there's a huge niche, a huge need for this, as Shasta was talking about. There's not a lot of work on health related impacts, so people are starting to work on it. And I've always been interested in climate change impacts on elders, particularly heat related stress, but I've never done anything else in health. So I'm back to this discussion after some time, and glad to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Carletta. I'm super glad you were able to come, and that somebody at Noah actually was the one to point me in your direction. Maybe we can hear from you one day at one of our meetings, a little bit more about your work. So does anybody else want to share thoughts on whether or not these goals seem appropriate, or other goals that we may want to consider? Do these resonate with you? Would this keep you coming back to participate in this group?
I have another one I want to add, which I feel like I should have already, you and I should have already talked about this, but I think like all of us, I have 852 billion things on my plate right now. And I would like to see, if not a separate goal, but at least woven into this, also something about protection of tribal data. And because we know that even though a lot of this data is hard for tribes to get, there's also data from tribes that other people are trying to get, whether that's health specific data or, and that's one thing here in Paula, anytime we have an opportunity for maybe some grant funding that has to do with water, and the agency wants to know, well, exactly how much groundwater are you pumping? And, they want all the details, and we're like, nope, that's a hard no. We will give up on funding if it means that we have to share our water information. And I think that that's something that we need to discuss with some of these other agencies that don't focus explicitly on tribes. And I know since we have a couple of agency folks on here, like we've got somebody from NOAA, whether they have a tribal consultation and climate change policy. As most of you know, I'm also the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for Paula, so I do consultation on projects that might have an impact on tribal cultural sites. And there's still this big shortfall in agency understanding that a cultural site does not just mean archaeology. It also means the water. It means the landscape. It means the air. It means the animals and the plants. It's all of those things. So as far as data is concerned, we need to make sure that there is some protection for the data that tribes not only need, but can provide.
Yeah, so I put in the chat box a guideline that we had created back in 2014, kind of along those lines, focused towards government entities and their lack of knowledge of those protections. So some of that may be applicable in terms of traditional knowledge, but there's definitely always more work and more training that needs to be done around data sovereignty.
Absolutely, and I'm heading up a work group right now with the Region 9 tribes, California, Arizona, and Nevada, on developing tribal data protocols that tribes can like kind of pick and choose from our template to develop their own data sharing or data confidentiality agreements, so that when they are working with agencies or with universities or organizations, they've got something ready to say, you know, this is our document on what you can and cannot do with our data, or what you have to do to get permission to work with tribal citizens. So this is great. Thank you, Carletta. And Angie, maybe this is something else we can do, is add another tab to our contact database. We can have another one where we can start populating it with these resources.
Yeah, I totally agree. Okay, I'm adding that just now for a placeholder. We do on our membership directory, I'm trying to actually find it. We have some folks that do represent sort of the data sovereignty field that I'm hoping will participate in these meetings in the future. It is a totally important piece of this. And that's sort of a point of discussion for this group. You know, most of my work ends up being looking, if I'm, when I am serving a tribe, I am looking for whatever data I can get externally for that tribe. I'm not often looking to give information as part of a vulnerability assessment or adaptation plan. So a lot of my focus is typically on the sort of the direction is this way. It's inward to the tribe. How can data become more accessible to tribes? But I feel like, yeah, if we see that we want to also tackle the data flowing outward piece too, that's something we can develop a goal for.
Hi, Angie, and this is Dora, California Department of Public Health. And one of the things that I think might be helpful too is addressing communicating and framing data.
Can you say more about that?
We found, you know, through the CDC and other projects that have worked a lot on developing data, that our own data that we put together, that there's a gap in translating that data to accessible information to a broader, you know, group than people who are, you know, very adept and familiar with using data.
Yeah. Right. So that's part of accessibility, right? So to what level the data is useful to communities.
Yeah.
I had a similar feeling to what Dora just offered, and I was wondering if the term data was being used really intentionally and how much we thought information was important to also discuss, because there's definitely a place between where data is in a more raw and very expertized form and when it becomes useful towards decision making, which I think of as passing through the information phase. And so I would think about how to use that language here, especially around, you know, better data access. It's like, it's data access, but it's data translation into usable and useful information.
And I think that could have different nuances for different groups of people and what their use cases for data.
Yes. Yeah. You know, I feel like I want others to chime in. I'm just going to advance slides a little bit because I have one that's sort of relevant here. This comes out of some of the tribal climate health work and some of the lessons we have learned from the work that we have done, looking for the right data, looking for how to make it most accessible. And this is sort of on the trajectory of where data lies in its usefulness or in its readiness. You obviously have raw data that might be collected as part of a research, that might be sitting in an academic paper. And there might be some level of analysis or pre-calculation that has been done that has made it somehow more available to those that may need that. That might be sitting in a table somewhere that's somewhat useful to folks that are looking for information. Further down the line of accessibility or usability might be what I sometimes call community ready data, which would be, you know, a lot of work putting into the accessibility of that data, making it user friendly as part of a tool. Maybe there's the parameters are meaningful to the communities that are using it, meaning location specific, that it includes parameters that are temporally meaningful, meaning the right historical or projected information. Maybe there's visualization involved, plus, you know, ideally, that even gives them assistance on using that information to make decisions. And so there are tools that kind of get us all the way there. And even maybe beyond that, and this is for conversation, it's just some thoughts, is beyond that, you could even customize a template for folks that pulls from all of that information without a whole lot of additional fact finding from the places where it's already accessible, in a report that could be made customized specifically with information that has to come internally from a community, because there is a lot, besides the information that can be publicly accessible or accessible from other outside organizations, a tribe, a lot of the information and vulnerability assessment has to be developed in-house. It has to be internal. But how much of the information that comes externally can we shortcut and make easier? So I just bringing that out there because to me this speaks to maybe goals. You know, to what extent can does this group sort of agree that getting further along this line is useful? Did that resonate with anybody, or anybody want to vociferously disagree with me, which I would actually welcome because it's usually me talking to my own head.
To me, this makes a lot of sense. And I like seeing it in this, visualized in this form, from the raw to the custom.
Yeah. It would eliminate, you know, if we had this kind of a structure available to tribes, it would eliminate a lot of additional work and resource spending that happens where we're not all the way there, right? Where all of, like, there's a lot of work going into identifying, compiling, analyzing, visualizing data over and over and over and over again for the thousands of communities across the country. In some cases, the same stuff within different parameters. So, I think I'm certainly not the only person looking at this from a how can we, do some aggregation here? How can we do some things that can make it easier for many?
Well, this may not be the right forum for this, but in that series of arrows, I'd like to see the option for sharing that data out, specific streams. So say you want to share water quality, but not pumping data. You want to share heat data, but you don't want to share health data. Some way that the tribes could, if they wanted to, engage with other government agencies or somebody else to share that data out without screwing themselves.
Yeah. Is that, would you say that's mainly happening, that tribes share data between each other to help each other, or that they're being asked for it, maybe data that they are collecting in-house, that they're being asked for it from other governmental agencies?
I don't know. I don't work with a tribe. I work with a government agency. What I hear is that there are lots of government agencies asking.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it might be worthwhile to target an upcoming meeting on this topic and bring in somebody who's an expert on this to bring a little more context in and see, give us a little education and see where else we can have a good discussion around it.
Jazz.
I was just going to say that I think that tribes in some cases might choose to share information. I think in other cases, the federal government used to have special requirements that if you had federal funding, you needed to share data with them that resulted from that funding. I think that they've been backing off. I know that the agencies that I work with have been backing off on that a lot. They've changed their policies completely to allow data sovereignty to exist for tribes specifically. But yet the tribes may choose to share information where they see fit, or they may choose to partner with someone and share some information, or they may just put limitations on how that data is visualized and shared when they finally do publish it. So it's kind of across the board.
Yeah, that's generally been my experience as well. And sometimes it's okay to share it. It's helpful. We just got awarded a new grant. I'm going to be excited here. Woo! We got DOE funding, $3 million to put in solar and battery storage and microgrids and all that stuff. So I'm super excited about that. The part I'm less excited about is the required in-person meetings in Denver, where fortunately one of my best friends lives in Denver, so that makes it worth it. But where you have to share everything about your project, everything. And we're okay with that in this instance, but I kind of wish DOE didn't necessarily want what we share to be so granular. I get that they've got an obligation to the taxpayers to show that the money is being spent in the way that it's meant to be, but sometimes it's a little bit much. So you see that here as well. But I know we're doing the opposite too, though. We're looking for the data. We want data. We don't necessarily have a problem with the giving of data. It's the receiving of data that's the problem. And what we've found more in Paula and some of the smaller communities that I've worked with in Southern California is that it's just hard. It's hard to get data that's specific enough to apply to the tribes. For much larger areas, it's a little bit easier. So that's another needle that we're trying to thread here is how do you get information that's specific to the 13,500 acres of Paula and not have to try to extrapolate that from data that's looking at the entirety of Southern California. We need something more specific than that. So, again, I know we've got that NOAA person on here. I don't know who it is. Cluck, isn't your last name? Isn't it Mr. Cluck? I'm like, give us data, Noah.
I think I'm going to jump in real quick on what Shasta just said. I think in some cases data at that granularity doesn't exist. And, the state of California has, where I work, has funded the state's climate change assessments in order to deliver more downscaled or regionally and locally specific climate projections. So thinking about forward-looking projections as compared to like what NOAA can offer nationwide. So Shasta, I flagged that, hoping that the legislature will fund the state's 5th climate change assessment, which is currently being debated with the governor and the legislature, in which case CEC will be running a new tribal climate research program. And in my head, what you just said is something that could be supported, preliminarily just between friends here is like an idea. So don't have a solution now, but maybe things will be coming that this group can help coordinate on. And granted, that's California specific, I know, but I would hope it could offer lessons learned to others as well.
Thanks, Leah. And I know that, California is always a leader in terms of this sort of thing, but we've got a lot of opportunities right now and in the next, 3.5 years to, hopefully the next I can't do math all of a sudden, 7.5 years to do a lot on this front. I do think we're moving in the right direction. And you're right, a lot of that data is way too granular. And I'll pick on my friends at Hamul who have a 2-acre reservation. I mean, it's not really going to be that helpful for them to be able to say, okay, the heat index on your 2 acres is exactly, this average throughout the year. And also, another thing that we need to bear in mind is that, some tribes may not want to get super, super granular data, because if they have to ask the agent, so whatever tracking agency, whether it's, NOAA or USGS or whomever, that means then that agency has that data because they've been asked to do a specific reading on a specific parameter for a specifically geographically bound area. And they might be like, it's not worth it to us, because then then somebody's going to know something specific about our lands that we don't necessarily want to be public. So this leads into just a larger conversation about the sovereign relationship between tribes and the federal government, what the trust responsibility is to be careful with tribal confidential data. And again, as a TIPO, I can tell you that on paper, they're supposed to keep things confidential, but the reality tends to be a lot more loose than what the regulations provide. So that's just something else. Because a lot of times too, and I'll just say this on my own behalf, I'll want something and I'll suggest it, and then another tribal colleague will say, well, you might want that, but we sure as hell don't. So knock it off.
It's Carmen Milanes from AWIHA. I'm wondering if I could offer just not necessarily related to the points that Leah and Shasta just made, but going back to that visual you had, Angie, of raw data all the way to customized user-driven information, that reminds me of what folks who dabble in environmental indicators and indices use to visualize like a pyramid of data, where the bottom is made up of raw data, and as you go up the pyramid, you have increasing level of synthesis, and also more accessibility, information that's not in the weeds and is more understandable. So I really like how this would be useful as an organizing structure, and actually reflecting back to the points from Leah and Shasta about granularity of data. You have the more detailed in the weeds raw data at the base of the pyramid, and then there's a little bit of synthesis when you summarize or calculate the data, even more synthesis when you have an indicator which tells a story, hopefully, and then even a greater level of aggregation when you have an index. And I think in the data and indicator world, what we often start with is a question that we want to answer using data and information. And it's helpful in navigating the many available data sets out there to kind of formulate that question and have the more summarized indicator type data available to folks so that they can drill down, de-aggregate, desynthesize, and get the information that they need, or drill up from the, I guess that's not drill, move up from the bottom to less detailed but more meaningful information. So I guess I'm just throwing out an idea where you could have some sort of a framework or a structure in thinking about the type of data that we want to increase access to, and have a greater level of meaning to a broader audience by just going up and down that pyramid or left and right on your diagram.
Yeah, and there's a lot of room there for improvement, and some of it's policy, kind of the level that Leah was talking about too. And some of it's, who's on the ground building, and there's a lot of players that can help us get further along if there's an agreement that getting further along is sort of a goal.
Yeah, but I think it's really overwhelming for someone trying to answer a question. Is my community likely to experience greater extreme heat events in X years, and where are these vulnerable communities? It's like, it's a question that's up here in the pyramid in my mind that you need to go down and drill down and get more granular data to be able to answer. But it helps with whoever is responding to that question or trying to come up with an answer to that question to know, be aware of that high level bits of information available, if that makes sense.
Well, it makes sense to me, and it's actually a really good segue because I think I want to move us into our next topic.
Wait, real quick before you do, can you share a screen on what Beth just put in the chat? Because I know I wasn't muted, and so you probably heard me sort of, bark with horror. Oh my God,
well,
Beth, please.
Friends here.
Yeah, so this was a map that was made by a group of partners a couple of years ago. It started out with the first image, so slide 1, and it was trying to define this idea of what is the data life cycle when it goes from data to information through facilitation to local government to, in all these phases it moves through. During the 2019 National Adaptation Forum, we ran a session on the data life cycle and where is there need for greater capacity building in the data life cycle. And people took the map that existed and then drew new lines that they thought were not represented yet, or perhaps entities that weren't represented in the way that this data life cycle was laid out on the first version. And so the second version is the post-NAF design. And I offer it sometimes in conversations because I think that the way that we imagine how data moves from its raw form into actually a policy change or practice change really goes through many hands, and it is not a direct cycle. It's really, all these arrows need two ways, and I think one of those comments came at some point, like any arrow here needs to be bidirectional, and so I just kind of throw it out there. I think it exists, and so I share it because things that exist I feel like should just keep, we're throwing them around.
And I was actually there at that meeting, and it all speaks to me, even the messiness of it, because doing a work, even doing a vulnerability assessment for a tribe is 18,000 times messier than that, right? Like in terms of what it actually takes to get the information together to make good decisions. So thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. I mean, it reminds me of a slide that I use when I give this presentation on how to do a good PowerPoint presentation. And the slide I use as an example of not a good slide is this terrifying slide from, I think it was the Department of Defense, showing something with Afghanistan and all the different moving pieces and parts. And it's basically just like a bunch of dots and arrows that was stirred by a blender. It's horrifying. Yours is at least a little bit more followable, but yeah, I feel like that's kind of where we are right now. We're trying to just get everything organized. But I'll point out that Claudia Brown in the chat, she just plugged CDC's second version of its heat and health tracker, which we've been playing with here in Paula and having a great time with that. So thank you so much for making that available. And Jessica also giving the caveat on that previous slide that it's not your best design work. Okay, I agreed. Terrified now.
I'm going to add that to the solutions.
So Angie?
Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to add in, I've run into this in other situations where in a lot of cases, the final decision makers in tribes are elders, not even elected, tribal council who consult with elders. And I don't even see like where that's even a part of this framework. And I think maybe that's something, to think about.
Thank you.
I mean, I've worked with tribal elders who don't want anything to do with computers, but they're making decisions.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, they want a different way that data is presented to them.
Well, I'll tell you what my hope is that I think there's a long way that we can go to reduce the time spent fact-finding externally to make it easier to grab the data that's necessary to make some good decisions. And by doing that, leaving more time for the community level engagement, the internal tribal engagement that needs to be done, needs time and care to be done well and meaningfully. But it's difficult, like maybe there could be more time spent there than all of this long, extensive, paralyzing analysis looking all over the place for data. That's my hope, because both of those graded things have to come together in order to have a meaningful vulnerability assessment. Okay, if you all don't mind, so that was awesome. I think what I will do is try to synthesize that conversation, take another crack at those goals, and maybe even combine it with some of the objectives that started to come out of this conversation and put it in a shared document that we can all kind of noodle over some more. We don't have a deadline to really nail it down, but I do feel like we're on the right track and we have some commonalities in terms of what we think, where we can provide some value together. Does that sound a good next step? Okay, I want to take a little time because it is a good segue, and I don't mean to suck up the attention here, but everything we just talked about is why the Tribal Climate Health Project took a crack at developing a tool. Now, we're not the only tool makers, but I wanted to share with you what we did because I think you might be able to, it will resonate with you in terms of what we have learned by building it. You might have some suggestions for us, and you might have some other tools that are doing things even better that we should know about. So I think last time I went through this really quickly, and so I'm not going to go through it much. I'm mainly going to want to demo it a little bit for you, but because we were doing trainings, we developed curriculum. Developing the curriculum to try to build capacity for tribes doing climate and health adaptation planning was overwhelming. The amount of information that we were going to have to pass along to tribes in order to help them really do the work was overwhelming. So I began swirling together the information and organizing it together in an inventory, meaning what are the exposures? What are the secondary exposures? What is the literature and research saying, so that not everybody has to go and reinvent this wheel, do all the lit review, do all the research and compile it all together, organize it in a way that it comes together meaningfully. And so it ended up becoming an Excel tool where we are basically creating these organized coded inventories of exposures, which you see at the top there, 5 key primary exposure areas, 4 secondary exposures, which cascade down from the primary exposures, and exposures meaning climate conditions that are changing, the tribe is not able to control, and those having impacts on the natural environment, built environment, health, and social environment. And this is like a not revolutionary model. This is what a lot of other folks kind of think through. But what our tool does that I don't see out there a lot is to actually provide indicators and data sources even at the impact level. And so a lot of times I see tools offering up your sort of general precipitation temperature level projections and data. That's really helpful. And then there's more that goes into maybe making a decision about what vulnerabilities represent the most severe and likely problems or threats to a tribe. So our tool also compiles a long laundry list of all of these things, including impacts. Impacts are sorted by relevance to exposures. They are sorted in a variety of ways I'll show you. And then they're also attached to population sensitivity and adaptive capacity measures, which should moderate the risk. And then we also make room for valued community assets, meaning what matters to this community. One of the ways that tribes could make a decision is not just how severe and likely a situation is, or whether or not their community is particularly sensitive or particularly ready to adapt, but that it will affect the things that matter the most to them. And so it tries to weave this information together to help improve decision making, and it's a worksheet as well to track the information, and it allows for ranking and prioritization. And then it also has a tab for adaptation strategies to try to address the vulnerabilities that have been identified. So we've tested this out with several tribes. I use it in my work, but we also have been funded by the BIA to do this with sets of tribes and try to revise and improve upon what we have built, and also better understand the gaps. So beyond what we have for years been able to compile together in these inventories, what else is out there? What other indicators are out there? What other data sources are out there? What do tribes need in different parameters to make it meaningful, to make decisions based off of? And so we're working with tribes to learn more about that. And so I think I mentioned last time that we have worked with the California Tribal Epidemiology Center to try to include additional health data sets into our EISI tool. And so these are the kinds of new indicators that we were able to add with data that CTEC has specific authority and expertise to compile and analyze and provide to tribes. And we've developed a whole protocol around it. So now in California, it's very easy to just say, hey, I want the climate and health data set. I'm going to make a request. You get all of these indicators that, at least in our work, we thought those are the data sets that CTEC has available that could be helpful in producing a vulnerability assessment. And so I actually just want to take a moment to share with you what the tool looks like. And it's so it's an Excel tool. That's not the greatest thing in the world. Our vision some days to do something a little bit better. But it's big. There's a lot of information in here, which represents and deconstructs the reality of how much information there really is to compile and how fragmented it is and where you go look for it. And that's where the rubber hits the road. For tribes that have somebody like me who at least knows where to go look, it might be a little easier. For tribes that don't, getting started from scratch would be a humongous lift. And so what this is attempting to do is to at least lift a lot of the fact-finding burden off of a tribe that would otherwise maybe have to start from scratch. And what are exposures? What are secondary exposures? What are the indicators for those? What potential impacts should I be even looking for? And when I go to look for that data, where could I get it? From a publicly accessible source. Ideally one that's pre-calculated, analyzed, and presented in a way that's usable. So that was sort of our criteria when trying to identify information that we should put in here, is to find the most useful thing accessible to tribes, ideally without having to go through a long data request process. So a lot of it is online, thank goodness. And so this compiles everything I have been able to find for several years. And so the way it's organized is, the first one is, if you're doing a vulnerability assessment, you're looking at your exposures, the severity and likelihood of exposures. And so those 5 primary exposures is how this is categorized. So say, for example, right now we're on drought. This actually tags the regions that are at greatest risk for any particular exposure. If one wanted to simply just go in and filter for Alaska, Great Plains, Southwest, they would be able to filter down this list of exposures to those that the research says is of greatest potential significance to them. Along with that is a long process of looking for best practices in terms of indicators. And so there's a long list here of exposure indicators mined from what I think are the most credible or similar sources. So we have, and what this is doing is presenting options for folks to look for data that would be meaningful to answer the question, what is my exposure risk level? And so at the end of the day, the goal is to allow anybody using this to rank high, medium, or low in terms of the information they were able to find. So if they want to look at, let's see here, max consecutive dry days, they could go, here's a site, they could go look here, and they could actually populate historical, baseline, and projected data here. It's not as fancy as it could be, but it gives them a place to assign their work, or capture their work, whatever their findings are. And then looking across here to establish an exposure risk level for themselves, high, medium, or low. Over here are just some notes about what the data parameters are. We do the same thing then for impacts, and these impacts are organized by exposure. So for, say, for example, temperature extremes, this first one over here, looking at this part. You could, again, you can filter down per region. You could filter down for the exposures you want to look at, and it will give you possible impacts, a long list of possible impacts. And so, you know, I'll even scroll out a bit and you just see. So anything, here we go, this is mental health, social and economic damages, heat-related disruption to plants and forests due to water stress. So for all of these possible impacts, which the literature talks about for each exposure, we talk about possible impacts and we tie those to impact indicators. So it's possibly enough for some tribes just to know that these are the potential consequences of the exposures, if they are severe and likely, that are coming at my region or my area. Here are some of the possible consequences. But if I want to go look and see how true that is, I actually can. So for heat-related stress, illness, and death, here are a bunch of ways, here are the indicators to see whether or not that's true for your community. Now, the caveat with all of this is that this is downscaled, or this is location specific as I could find. And so like Claudia and CDC do an awesome job of providing so much information. So they're listed in here over and over and over again. But there's limitations there too, right? Like oftentimes I can only get down to a state level or a county level. And so we do the best we can in terms of pointing people in the direction of the best data source and hoping that they can derive as much meaning from it as they can, knowing that the world isn't a perfect place and perfect data doesn't exist right now. And so maybe like the goal seems to be like moving to a more perfect place somehow by piling, you know, getting further along on that stratum. So that's kind of how it all works. I want to mention too, so a lot of this started with national data sources, and then because our focus is often in California, we got BIA funding to have a California specific set of data sources, because California has a ton that's a lot more specific and sometimes more useful than what's available nationally. And there's room there to do that for additional regions. So this is available for anybody who wants to work within ugly little Excel document. And I just wanted to share it with you and then share with you some of our lessons learned. You know, here's where there's population sensitivity and adaptive capacity measures, same kind of thing, a place to put findings. Like there's indicators and indicators and sources. And then here's our strategies tab. So when folks are done with the vulnerability assessment and are ready to look for adaptation strategies, this is a filterable way to look at it in different ways. Are you looking at tackling you know, a certain adaptation strategy type? Are you looking to tackle a certain exposure, secondary exposure, or impact type? In which way, you know, health, natural environment, built environment. You can try, this is sort of like a finder for strategies. This is not the best one out there. Some of you out there have inventories of thousands of strategies. I think we have 150 or something, but they're mined a lot from tribal experiences, tribal adaptation plans and things like that. And it's coded in the way that sort of corresponds to the vulnerability, you know, to the rest of the tabs. It also allows for some planning. So when if I do an adaptation plan, I don't like to leave it as like, here's a list of 40 strategies. We try to make it into an action plan where we're prioritizing the strategies that we do by looking at need and feasibility at a high level. And then we're starting to plot out, okay, well, this is something that could be done in this time frame. Here's a responsible department. What other resources and partners might mean we need? And so this is like some early planning that can be done up front. And this just sort of guides folks as a way to be able to start doing some of that. Okay, so I can stop for questions on the tool, but what I really wanted to do is share with you like what our learnings are from that. Shasta, did you see anything come through that needs to be addressed?
No, just Lori saying that she drank the EISI Kool-Aid and it was sweet and cold, which is cracking me up. Yes. No, and I agree. I have gotten much more on board because Excel scares me. But yeah, this is, I think, even though it might not be the most aesthetically pleasing thing in the world, it's an incredibly useful and data-rich tool.
So like tons of information and yet still somehow totally incomplete, right? Because there's endless amounts of information that could possibly go in there. But so what we've learned, and by the way, thank you, Lori, that you're our, you're our new spokeswoman, is that I could do my best to try to find data for the tribe I'm trying to serve, and sometimes it's just missing, and that's just the way the world is. And for example, this is getting better. A lot of folks, the data scientists are trying to tackle things like allergies, allergy rates or allergens. That was a topic a couple of years ago that everybody's sort of scratching their heads around. I feel like those solutions are starting to come. That information is starting to come, but for a while there, it was really hard to find. How do you know who's having an allergic reaction? It's not something that's mandatorily reported, right? In some kind of health data set. Or sometimes something might exist, like for example, smoke waves. That was an interesting concept. I think in California, there was researchers trying to define something called a smoke wave, which was, I don't want to just look at randomly how much PM 2.5 is happening on an annual basis. I want it to be episodic. I want it to be tied to a climate event like a fire, and that's what's meaningful to me when I'm doing a vulnerability assessment. And so we talk about that a little bit down here too. So sometimes it's missing. A lot of times it's not location specific enough, especially for tribes. If you're a county, you're looking pretty good. But if you're a tribe, you almost never have your boundary addressed. So you're having to make a lot of assumptions about the larger region and whether or not it applies to you. For things like even asthma levels. We know that tribes have higher levels of asthma in general, and so what happens to them in a high ozone episode versus what would happen to the larger county. That would be useful information. And then oftentimes the data is missing timescales and projections. So for health data, you almost never get modeled information. That's a huge need. So I might know the kind of heat-related illnesses that have happened in the last 20 years, thanks to CDC, but it's more difficult to look at, it's more difficult to find projections. And I think there are some folks out there that are doing that really well. And heat-related illness gets more attention than most of the other health-related impacts. And then often data, like I said before, is not episodic or easily attributable to climate change, like respiratory illness related to fire, PM, or heat and ozone. These are just examples. So then we have a whole list of data needs, key outstanding data needs. This came from our work with tribes and what they said could be most useful. These yellow areas are areas where we think we've made additional inroads in the last year or two. But there's a lot more work out here. There's a lot more data that is out there in conditions that might be accessible but aren't really that great. And then some that's just not available at all. So here we're back to this, meaning if everything was to the right here, my work would be a lot easier. People would have to pay me a lot less to get to the point of getting them a vulnerability assessment, and I'd be happy to see it. Okay, so I'm gonna stop there, and there's not much time left, but that was sort of to wet our whistles. And did anybody want to share any ideas or opportunities from your vantage point that you want to contribute to the conversation here, just around like what you saw, what else, what are you doing that's similar, what do you know? All right, put everybody to sleep. I will say one more thing is that I have, most of you, if you have a tool, I've probably tagged you in those hyperlinks to data sources. So thank you. And I'm pulling from whatever expertise out there I can find.
That'd be great too if folks could even look at the links and let us know if we've missed anything.
That's a big ask, but I would 100% take any constructive criticism or additions.
And our hope for the future is to take this from the Excel format and get it into some sort of drop down online, kind of build your own vulnerability assessment sort of thing. But that's a multi-tens of thousands of dollars of web developer fees project. So if anybody wants to throw some money at us, we're happy to take it, and we'll put your name on it, your picture.
Not a sales pitch though, but we're on the, we're out here trying to make it better. But it isn't as though we're the only ones doing something like this. So, we could even support somebody else who's doing this well. Like for example, we're sort of partnering up with Temperate, who's got a really good decision tool. And we provide some advice to them on how they could better serve California tribes. And they've enhanced their tool with additional data sets based on what we have been able to find. So we're super open to partnering, right? I mean, we're federally funded. I don't think Shasta and I could even stand a whole lot more work. We just want to make this as valuable as possible.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
What do you see as what is wrong with the existing templates and tools that exist for creating tribal vulnerability assessments that you would do differently?
Yeah, there's so many good ones, and there's just so many good ones. And so part of it's just like the amount of fragmentation there is, the amount of work it takes to track it down and use it meaningfully, identify, if you were starting from scratch, you would have to understand how the exposures relate to impacts, really, relate to vulnerabilities. You'd have to figure out for yourself what the cascading effects really look like, and look up indicators and figure out how you even measure it, and then you have to go find the data for yourself. So
I think that your spreadsheet is unique, but I think there's a number of templates for vulnerability assessments and adaptation plans that already exist. And so I think there's a balance between trying to create something new versus incorporating what you've done into other people's efforts.
Yeah. I've seen some really good decision tools that might have a smaller data sets, oftentimes not targeting health to the extent that we've tried to, often not targeting impacts almost at all. So I just think, if there was a one-stop shop tool that took into account a lot of these data sets and did it in a visualized way that was very accessible, great. It doesn't have to be one tool, it could be many tools. But I have yet to find one that I'm like, that nailed it. Like that did all the work. And the fact-finding mission is done.
Yeah, and in an ideal world, I'd like to see something that like connected the data and the money. So as an example, in the report that we're working on with Bishop Paiute, they were able to use our GIS fire map that showed the fires that had impacted the Bishop Paiute community over the last 20 years to get a fire safe grant. And so but we didn't, he just happened to know that was available, and then he tied them together and the money flowed down. But someplace that, so that we know that we could say to a tribe, hey, you might want to use this map to apply for this grant too. I mean, in the best of all worlds, the money.
Yeah, you're right. I don't want to keep us over, even though I guess I have. So I will send out the link, and if anybody does want to provide me with more input, great. But if this jogs ideas for future conversations that are more broad, wonderful. I'll also take a look at who offered to present, and I'll start picking on those of you who offered to see if you can be part of our future agendas. And this is what a future agenda will probably look like, and I'll send this out too if you have suggestions for changes. That would be wonderful. Anything else, Shasta? I think I'll close this off here. Okay.
Nope, it's lunchtime, so I'm good to go.
All right. Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate your time. Come back again.
Thank you. Bye.